This is an absolute beginner's guide to software engineering, part 1.2, because why make it easy? In the last video, which I'll be sure to link somewhere in this general area, we talked about the terminal. We set it up, made it a little bit prettier, talked about some basic bash commands to navigate through there, just to get a little bit more comfortable in the environment. You don't have to be Mr. Robot to navigate the terminal. We also talked about Git and GitHub, which are two separate things, and we know that now. We set up Git on our local machine, and we set up SSH for GitHub on our local machine so that we can securely push and pull information from our machine to GitHub. Now I think it's time to talk a little bit more about version controlling. When you set up version controlling for a project, you tell your version control software to look at the contents of a specified folder and track everything that's inside of that folder. There are a few different ways to initialize a Git repository. You could either start by initializing the repository on your local machine and then pushing it to GitHub, or you could create the repository in GitHub and pull down the empty folder to your local machine and then just add your files to that empty folder and make an initial commit. I know it sounds tricky, but trust me, I really do think that the second way is actually the easiest way to do it. Let's go ahead and just start there, okay? Let's head over to GitHub. When you first log into GitHub, you're brought to your dashboard here. This gives you a nice little widget area where you can create a new repository. However, we're not going to use this widget area because I want some additional options for the repository that we create. We can either use this green Create Repository button, or if you don't see that, you can go into the upper right, click on the plus, and click on New Repository. Here is where we'll name our repository. I'm going to name mine Facehair Project 1. You can choose public or private. I'm going to leave mine public for now. I do like to add a default README. And I also like to add a gitignore template. I usually add the node template. So let's just go ahead and in this filter area type node and select it. We're not actually going to need the gitignore for this project, but I wanted to add it just so that I can show you what it's for and how it's used. For the license, we can leave this set to none, and we'll click on Create Repository. Okay, cool. So we're brought to this page. This is our first Git project. Let's head over to the terminal real quick. From your home folder, which is the tilde. So if you're not there, type cd tilde. Navigate to your source folder, which we created in the last video, cd src. You may have the Facehair project directory in your source folder still. You can just delete that by typing rm-rf Facehair, whatever that name was. You should have it there. I've deleted mine. Now that we're in our source folder and mine is empty, let's head back to GitHub. Click on this little green code button. Make sure that SSH is selected. Click on the copy button to copy the SSH URL. And back in the terminal, type git space clone space and paste the URL. Now, before I hit enter, I want to talk about this. This is the first Git command that we're actually using in our terminal, so we might as well break it down. All of our Git commands are going to start with the name Git. The second argument there, clone, is telling Git what to do, and clone wants a URL. So we're giving it this URL, and what it's going to do is download all of the files from the project that we've just created and place them in a folder or directory called Facehair Project 1. So let's hit enter and type ls. Okay, so now we see that we have this new directory, Facehair Project 1. I also want to note it's possible that since we set up SSH, you may have been prompted for a password. If you were prompted for a password and continue to be prompted for passwords when you try to use SSH through GitHub, if you're on Mac OS, type nano, this will open up your nano editor, tilde, shorthand for your home directory, /.ssh, this is a directory where all of your SSH config files are kept, and config, which is the config file for your SSH. And then add this string here that you see on screen, host space asterisk enter, and then 2 spaces, use keychain yes. Be sure to pay attention to capitalization. When you're done, hit Control X and be sure to press Y and enter to save the file. If you're on Windows, there are actually 2 commands that you need to run, but unfortunately you'll need to run them every session. So every time you start git bash, you'll need to run these 2 commands. There's an easy way to do this. So let's type nano space tilde slash dot bash rc and hit enter. Here you can type any terminal commands, and all of the commands typed in this file will be run as soon as you open up a new git bash session. So type eval space tick. Tick is the same button as tilde, but just not with shift. So the button below escape and above tab. SSH dash agent space dash s tick. What this will do is start your SSH agent. We did this in the last video when we generated our SSH key. Press enter to indicate that we're going to run a new command here, and type ssh dash add tilde slash dot ssh slash asterisk underscore RSA. Let's break this down real quick. SSH add is a command telling you which SSH keys you want to be active during your git bash session, essentially. This path uses what's called a wildcard. That's the asterisk here. This asterisk just means any string. So any file within the .ssh directory that ends in .rsa will be added to your session's SSH. Press Ctrl X, Y for yes, and enter to exit and save. Now, anytime you restart git bash, you'll be prompted for your password once, and you can push and pull freely from there without having to enter your password more times. Another quick note for some users, you may be prompted that the website is untrusted. Just hit Y to trust the website and you'll never be prompted with that again. So let's CD into Facehair Project 1. And we can see immediately that our prompt is different. This is going to be specific to my prompt that I've customized. So if you followed along with that part of the last video to customize your terminal, then you're going to see the same thing here. So let's break it down real quick. This little plus minus symbol you can pretty much ignore, but this is where it gets kind of important. So the main section here is going to tell you what your branch is. So right now we're on our main branch. You'll see this interchanged with the word master. Master is kind of a legacy term used for the main branch. So you may, depending on what video you're watching or what repository you're in, you may see master used. Just know that master and main are the same thing. We're going to be using main from here on out. So we're currently on our main branch, and this little green check mark tells us that everything is up to date. We're good. So let's ls. Looks like we have a readme.md, and let's ls space dash a. All right, looks like we've got a .git directory and a .gitignore file and our readme.md. By the way, md is the file extension for Markdown file, which is basically just like a fancy text file. At this point, I'd really like to get more into some of the Git commands, but in order to do that, we need to be able to make changes to our files. So let's go ahead and download our IDE. IDE is an acronym for Integrated Development Environment. The IDE is to code files what Microsoft Word is to text files. Does that make sense? Any code file that you open up within your IDE, instead of executing the code, it's going to open it up and allow you to edit the code. So for example, if you have an HTML file and you just double click on the HTML file, by default, that file will be opened in the browser and you're going to see essentially a web page. However, if you open that HTML file with your IDE, then it will bring you to the code that you can then edit, right? There are a ton of options as far as IDEs go. Some of them are free, some of them are paid. They all have their pros and cons, and depending on what developer you're speaking to, they're going to have their preferences or beefs with one over the other. But from what I've seen, the general industry standard IDE is VSCode, which is an IDE made by Microsoft that is just really well developed, I guess. There's a bunch of extensions that you can get for VS Code that'll enable you to do different things with it. I'm sure that we'll cover a few of those extensions. There's also an integrated terminal that I know a lot of developers really like to use as opposed to a separate terminal window. I still prefer a separate terminal window, but we'll cover the integrated terminal as well. Some IDEs are more bare bones than others. VS Code is kind of as bare bones as you want it to be, depending on how many extensions you install and what settings you utilize. And I'm sure that throughout your journey as a software engineer, you're going to find extensions and settings that will be useful to you that we won't cover here in this video. But let's just get things kickstarted. You can either Google VS Code or just go to code.visualstudio.com. I'll leave a link in the description, and download whatever appropriate file version for your machine, Windows, Mac, whatever it may be. I already have it installed, so I'm not going to walk you through this portion, but it should be pretty self-explanatory. Once you have that installed, go ahead and open it up. On Mac, it's pretty convenient. Just in your Spotlight, type code and hit enter. And here is VS Code with no project open. The first thing I'm going to have us do before we really start talking about the IDE, I want you to press Command-Shift-P, and that's going to open up this little search bar with the greater than caret, and then just type install code. There we go. And we get this little command here, shell command install code command in path. Just click on that and you should get this little notification that says shell command code successfully installed in path. Okay, great. All that's going to allow us to do is open up projects from the terminal in code. It's very convenient. We'll get to that. Now that we've installed code to our path, let's talk a little bit about how the IDE is typically used. Typically in an IDE, you're not going to open up a single file. You're going to open up an entire project directory. So in this instance, we could click on open and find our directory. However, an easier way that I prefer is to actually go ahead and close out of code, open up your terminal, and navigate to the project folder that we created earlier when we git cloned into Facehair Project 1, and then just type code space period. And this is basically just saying, open up an instance of VS Code here. We talked about the period in the last video. The period is just shorthand for this current directory. Perfect, and that opens up another instance of VS Code. We can see at the top we're in Facehair Project 1, and then on the left bar here, if we click on this top tab, this is our file explorer, and we can see all of the contents of Facehair Project 1. We have our git ignore. If we click on it, we'll open up that file, and we have the readme.md. Let's go over these other tabs real quick. So the top tab is your file explorer. You're going to be in here a lot. The next tab is your search tab. You can also get here by pressing Command-Shift-F to search the entire repository. So for example, we could search for face, and we see that we have one instance of the word face, and it exists in our README file. The next tab is our source control tab, or version control tab. This is where we can make commits to Git. We'll get to that after we cover some of the basic terminal commands for Git, because I think that it's important to know the terminal commands for Git before leaning on the Git integration in VS Code. The next tab is our debug tab. I honestly don't use this very often and probably won't cover it in the foreseeable future. The next tab is the extensions tab. While we're in here, let's go ahead and install two extensions. You'll see here I already have them installed. Just search for Prettier and install this Prettier Code Formatter extension, and then type in Markdown and install this Markdown Preview Enhanced extension. Now go back to your file explorer and click on the readme.md. Right click anywhere in the file and click Markdown Preview Enhanced. Open preview to the side. You'll see here it also gives you a hotkey for this. And this is going to open up a preview for your Markdown file. Like I said before, Markdown is really just a fancy text file. You can do a lot of really nice formatting in here to make everything look really nice. I recommend Googling GitHub Markdown. It'll take you to the GitHub docs where you can learn about how README Markdown files can be formatted and how they appear on your project page. But I'd like to make a change to our README Markdown just to show you what that looks like in our live preview on the right-hand side here, and also to demo some of the out-of-the-box functionality that we get with VS Code and our version control. So on a new line, I'm going to make a new header. This is going to be a header 2, so it's going to be a little bit smaller than the one up top. I'm going to type something, anything, I don't know. I have no idea what I'm supposed to type here. My brain goes blank when I do things like this, so forgive me. Forgive me. Look at that. I'm asking you for forgiveness. Let's see. I don't know. I have 2 dogs. And then let's make a list. We'll call one of them Christopherson, because I do have a dog named Christopherson. And let's make another one for Scout, because I also have a dog named Scout. So now you can kind of see these different bits of Markdown, right? And then another thing that you can see is this green line that we get on the left-hand side of the file here. This is telling us that these are net new lines. So if we were to change this one, let's call this, let's rename this from Facehair Project 1 to the first project repo of the Facehair 4000 tutorial. So now you can see that this green vertical line on the left changed from green, which signified that we had newly added lines, to blue, and now it spans the entire height of the file, signifying that we've just changed something. It's not always the most helpful thing. Like, you know, it might be more helpful just to see that like this would be blue and these would be green. But we'll see examples of that in the future, I'm sure. Now that we've made our change in VS Code, you'll notice that this tab up top, the readme.md tab, has a white circle. That signifies that we have unsaved changes. So I'm going to hit Command S or Control S on Windows to save, and that white circle goes away and becomes an X again. You can change the save functionality in the settings of VS Code by going to Code, Preferences, Settings, and you can search the settings. So I'll just search for save, and I turn auto save to on focus change. That's what I prefer. You can change this to whatever you would prefer. So now anytime I make a change in the file and I click anywhere else, that white circle automatically goes away because the changes are saved. Now that we've made some changes, let's open up our terminal. Let's refresh our prompt by just pressing enter. And you'll see that something has changed. The green check mark has turned into a red X, and we have this new little lightning bolt symbol here. These new little icons signify that there's something changed about the status of our Git repository. If we don't know what that is, we can either look in VS Code, or in the terminal, we can type git status. This is going to show us that the readme.md file has been modified. Back in VS Code, we can go to our source control tab and see here that we have some changes. If we click on this, we'll get a side-by-side representation of everything that's been changed. And if we want to open up a file from this tab, we can press on this little button here, open file, to just open it instead of looking at the working tree changes, which can be confusing. We're going to get back to this README shortly, but there are a few changes that I'd like to make first. Let's head over to the Explore tab, right-click, and select New File, and type index.html. We won't be writing any HTML in this video, but I wanted to add this just as some boilerplate. Now, if you look at your source control tab, you'll see that we have a new file, and it is annotated by this U, which stands for untracked. So we have not yet staged the changes. Let's talk a little bit about the staging of changes in Git. You can use the VS Code UI, which I'm going to do right now just to show you the different stages. And you should use the VS Code UI in the future, but I do want to go over the commands in the terminal as well, just to cover all of our bases. It's important to know. Making a commit to a Git repository has a few phases, and the first phase of that commit is staging the changes. So right now, all of our changes are unstaged, and we need to move them to the staging area. So what we can do is stage an individual file by pressing a plus symbol here, and that will move it to this staged area, minus to unstage. Or we can stage individual changes by clicking on this colored line and clicking the plus symbol here. If you click on this revert symbol right next to the plus, it will undo the changes. So don't do that for now. Or you could just stage all of the changes by clicking on the plus symbol here, and then making a commit as simple as typing in your commit message and clicking commit. But don't do that. Don't do it yet. Hold your horses. We're going to do this in the terminal first, just so that we can learn, and then we will be using the VS Code integration from here on out. So let's go ahead and delete the commit message and unstage our changes. Okay, let's head back to the terminal. I'm going to type git status to see what our changes look like. And we can see now that we have changes not staged for commit. We have a modified readme.md, and we have untracked files, which is this index.html. We can stage these changes from the terminal by typing git add, and then either the file name, separated by spaces if we want to do multiple individual files, or if we want to commit everything, git add space period. There's that period again. Again, the period stands for everything here. So we're just going to stage everything. And now you'll see that this lightning bolt and plus symbol have changed into an arrow, meaning that we have staged changes. So type git status to see what that looks like. And we see that the changes to be committed are the readme file, which has been modified, and the index.html, which is a new file. Now to commit the changes, we'll type git commit space -m. We talked a little bit about flags in the last video. This flag signifies that we're about to insert a commit message, which will be surrounded in quotation marks, and we'll type initial commit and hit enter. And now we see that the X has gone back to a check mark. However, these changes have still only been committed on our local machine, and we need to let GitHub know about the new changes. So type git push. Great. Now let's go over to GitHub. Navigate to your repository, and you'll see that the changes to your README are published. Look at that, along with your commit message of your most recent commit here. Now that we've made our initial commit, let's go back to the terminal. And we want to make a new branch. Best practice for making a new branch is to first pull any changes. So let's type git pull and hit enter. Everything's up to date. We already knew this. I'm just kind of showing you what the best practices are, and you'll see why later. I'll explain it. Now we need to create our new branch. There are a bunch of ways to do this, but I use some shorthand that I think simplifies it. Type git checkout -b. This is a flag for create the branch. And then the branch name. You're going to be naming the branch here, so let's be intentional about the name of our branch. What we'll be doing in this branch is updating the README. So let's just call this README updates. Now you'll notice switched to new branch README updates, and main has changed to README updates. Before we do anything, we need to let GitHub know about this new branch. So type git push -u README updates. Since GitHub doesn't know that this branch exists, we essentially need to create it a second time as an upstream branch. But once we do this, GitHub will have that branch and we can push to it with just git push and no U flag. So hit enter. Oh, you know what? I forgot something. I'm sorry. Git push -u origin README updates. Origin is specifying that you're setting your upstream to the original repository that you cloned. So it's git push -u origin, and then your new branch name, which has to be exactly as you named it here. Again, you only do this once per branch creation. Okay, there we go. Now, real quick before we make our changes, let's head back to GitHub, refresh the page, and you'll see that we have 2 branches. If you click on that, you'll see that we have the default branch set to main and another branch called README updates. Let's head back to the main project folder. And you'll see this message here, your main branch isn't protected. You can choose to protect this branch, and what this will do is prevent you or anyone else from making commits directly to main. I don't think it's important for now, or probably at all in a personal project. This is more important for when you're working in a group project and want to ensure that all contributors are committing to a branch instead of directly to your main branch, but feel free to do this if you'd like. Let's head back to VS Code and start making some changes to our README. I googled README boilerplate and found some pretty nice boilerplate that I customized to be more specific to this project. Let's go ahead and implement that now. We'll replace this top header with Facer 4000 Project 1 Git and VS Code familiarization. We'll add a small project description. And I don't think that forgive me and I have 2 dogs are relevant to the project, so let's go ahead and change those 2. Generally, a README will have an installation section. This isn't going to be particularly relevant to our project, but we'll have it anyway. I'm going to use some Markdown here for monospacing, which is what you use to imply that the text that you're writing is intended to be code. This can be done in 2 ways: inline, or if you're writing multiple lines of code with 3 ticks. Let's add another section for usage. This section of a README is typically where you'll define the purpose of the project. In our case, there isn't much purpose for the project, so let's type in some boilerplate here. Here's a good opportunity for a link, I think. Let's put a link to my YouTube playlist. A link is represented by open and closed brackets and open and closed parentheses. The brackets will contain the text, and the parentheses will contain the URL. Next, we'll create a support section. In most large-scale projects, this section just details how you can get help on the project. In our case, let's just give them a link to our Discord. Also, you can just implement emojis directly in, which is kind of fun. So let's add a little wink here. Now we'll add a section for contributing. This is where you specify your preferences for how people branch or fork from your Git repository. Don't worry about all the details for now. Oh, I almost forgot. I am terrible with typos constantly. I need a spell checker. So let's head over to the extensions tab and install the code spell checker. Much better. Hey, look, no typos. All right, now that we're finished making the changes to the README, let's head over to the source control tab. Let's stage our changes, enter in a nice commit message, and click the commit button. Okay, I got an error here. You might have also gotten this error, so let's talk about it. If we click on open git log, it will bring us to the error message. And let's scroll up until we see something relevant. Ah, perfect. Git config global user email and global username. I'm pretty sure we set username in the last video, but regardless, let's go ahead and run these in our terminal. I'm just going to copy one of them. We'll do email first, paste it into the terminal, and replace the email with your email. Press enter, and do the same for username. Let's try this again. Perfect. So the changes have been stashed, they've been committed, and now we need to push them. So head back to the terminal and type git push. Again, you only need to do the -u origin the first time you push to a branch. So now that we've already established this branch on GitHub, we can just git push. Let's head over to GitHub and see what that looks like. All right, so super convenient. We get this nice yellow section right on our project's front page. README updates has recent pushes less than a minute ago. And let's just click on this green compare and pull request button. And now we'll create our pull request. This is actually very simple. We title the pull request. This is totally arbitrary. You can name this whatever you'd like. I'm going to leave it as is for now, especially since this is just a solo project and it's not that big of a deal. If we scroll down, we can see all of the changes that were made. You can make a comment if you'd like. Try this. I don't know if it's actually going to work, but if you type @face hair, I wonder if this will actually ping me. Please, yeah, at me on your pull request here. I would love to see what you guys are up to. And then click on create pull request. Now that the pull request has been created, we can again look at the files changed. This is going to give us our full diff, and we can then merge pull request, confirm merge, and this will make the changes to our main branch. So if we head back to our Facehair project 1, all of our README changes have now been applied here. Let's go back to the terminal. Now that we're done with this branch, let's switch back over to main. You can either do this by typing git checkout main. Checkout is just the git command for switching branches. Git checkout main will take you back to main, or shorthand, git checkout dash will take you to your previously checked branch. So if I type git checkout dash, it'll bring me to main. And if I type git checkout dash again, it'll bring me back to recent updates. So let's go to main. Now that we've checked out main, let's head back over to VS Code. You'll notice that all of our changes to the README are gone. It's back to the way that it was before the changes. This is because GitHub has applied our changes to the main branch, but we haven't pulled those changes. Let's head back over to the terminal and type git pull. This will give us a summary of the changes that have been applied. And back in VS Code, we'll now see our changes. Let me get rid of this. There we go. This is why it's important to always git pull before you create a new branch, because when you create a new branch using that -b flag that I talked about, it creates the branch based on the current state of your currently checked out branch. Let's head back to the terminal again. I'm going to clear my terminal. And now I'd like to run through a quick step-by-step beginning to end for a Git branch and its changes and merges. Step 1, ensure that we're checked out on the main branch. Step 2, git pull. This will make sure that we're on a fresh branch of main. Step 3, git checkout -b new branch name. Step 4, push the new branch to origin. Step 5, make our changes. Step 6, stage our changes. Step 7, enter a commit message. Step 8, commit our changes. And step 9, push our changes. Step 10, head over to GitHub and create a pull request. And finally, merge the pull request. Don't forget to pull your changes as soon as you check out your main branch again. If you're making large changes, it's wise to commit often. So there are going to be many instances where you'll have a pull request with dozens of commits. This is a good practice. Commit often and make sure that you use a detailed commit message. All of your commit messages can be viewed in the Git log, accompanied by their hash. A commit's hash is the unique identifier that represents a specific set of changes. You can use this hash to reset your repository back to that specific set of changes if you need to. The commit that represents the current state of your repository is called your head. You can see that here. You can reference the head just like you would reference a hash in the Git commands that I was referring to earlier, which we'll cover later. Press Q to exit the Git log. I cleared my terminal again because I type a bunch of crap while you guys aren't looking, and I don't want that to be confusing. Let's make a new branch. This time, we're not going to bother pushing it to GitHub because the intention of this branch is just to kind of mess things up and delete it. So we're just going to call it "This branch sucks." Now let's go to VS Code and make a quick change. It can be anything. I mean, really anything. Save your changes. Don't stage or commit anything. Let's just leave this unstaged. Back to the terminal. Let's take a look at our Git log. Copy this hash, press Q, and type git reset --hard and paste the hash. Press enter, and back in VS Code, you'll see those changes are gone. Be very careful with this command, especially with the --hard flag. This is irreversible. Back to the terminal, I would just like to recognize quickly here that this command that we just ran is basically just the long form of typing git reset -- hard head, all capital. Remember how I said you can use head to refer to the most recent commit? This is what I meant. Let's make some more changes. And this time we're actually going to stage and commit the changes. Now back in the terminal, let's look at our git log. And we'll see that we have those recent changes that we made at this hash, and it is currently our head. But I'd like to undo these changes without actually losing the stuff that we type. We can do this by resetting to the hash without using the -- hard flag, or we can use shorthand involving the head. So let's do that. Press Q and type git reset head, all capitals, with 1 caret. This means we want to go back 1 commit before the head. You can use as many carets as is necessary to go back as far as you need, but let's just use 1. Now if we type git log, we'll see that we're back to the merge, and if we go to VS Code, our changes are still present, but are unstaged and uncommitted. Back to the terminal, press Q to exit git log. Let's undo those changes real quick because we don't actually need them. Let's go back to the main branch. And now let's take a look at our list of branches. Type git branch and hit enter. Here we can see all of the branches that we've made, as well as the current branch that we're on highlighted. Press Q. Let's delete this branch sucks. Type git branch -d. This branch sucks. Cool, I'm glad we finally got rid of that. Honestly, that branch kind of sucked. I think that's enough Git for now. There's a lot you can do with this tool, and it can get really complicated really fast. I know how difficult it is to get up to speed at first because everything that you look at just looks way too far in the weeds. But I think that this was a pretty good set of basics, and hopefully you're feeling a little bit more comfortable using the tooling and can start to use it on a more regular basis. I put together a cheat sheet of some of my most commonly used commands. I didn't cover everything in that cheat sheet in today's video, but the cheat sheet contains descriptions that should be helpful enough, and you can always Google stuff too. I'll be sure to put a link to the cheat sheet in the description, so feel free to use that as a reference anytime you need. Sticking to the overall theme of this video series, I definitely want you to be doing stuff in Git on your own to really flex that muscle. Like I said in the very first video, there's this gap between what you're being told and what you're doing, and sometimes there's something that goes wrong in there and something's not acting like you think that it should, and you have to Google it and troubleshoot and figure out what is going wrong. That's where the growth happens, and that is like really like the magic stuff, you know? I'm going to end each of these videos with a section that I've lovingly decided to call around and find out. And now is that section. It's your turn to around and find out. So if you're up for it, here's what I would love for you to do. In the same project, create a new branch. Make sure you call it something descriptive based on what you're going to do. On that branch, make any changes to your repository that you would like to make. You could flesh out the README a little bit, maybe add an About Me section. Maybe you know some HTML already and you want to start filling out that index.html file to include whatever you'd like. Hell, if you don't know HTML, maybe you want to Google HTML basics and start filling out the index.html before I put out my next video, which will be about HTML and CSS. Spoilers. But when you're done making the changes to your repository, make sure that you commit the changes and push them to GitHub, then make a pull request to your main branch. If you can figure out how to @me in the pull request on GitHub, please do. I would love that. I would really just love to like get a bunch of ats on GitHub with you guys making your pull requests. That sounds like a blast to me. So yeah, I don't know how to do it because I'm not like super accustomed to just like public GitHub. I'm used to like enterprise GitHub, which has groups and allows us to like @ team members and things like that. But if you're able to figure out how to do that on public GitHub, I would just be so tickled. And then merge your pull request to your main branch. Thanks so much for sticking around to the end of the video. If you learned something new in today's video, be sure to leave a comment. That just warms my heart to see. If you didn't learn anything, or if you have some suggestions for how I could improve these videos, that also means the world to me. Please leave a comment. because if these videos aren't helpful to you, then there's not a point in making them, and they take a long time to make. On that note, actually, it's been like a week and a half since I started recording and editing this video, and I need to go wash this shirt. So I'll catch you guys in the next one. Keep learning.